When the Cumberland River flooded Nashville in May 2010, the worst natural disaster in Tennessee's history, the waters receded to reveal more than property damage. In a muddy field off Old Hickory Boulevard, a rescue worker stumbling through debris found a waterlogged metal box wedged against a fence post. Inside, sealed in plastic bags that had somehow survived decades underground and 2 weeks submerged, 37 Polaroid photographs. The images were horrifying. Young women bound and gagged, eyes wide with terror. Different girls, different locations, but the same gloved hands visible in each frame, positioning them, controlling them, documenting them like trophies. But here's what made veteran detectives' blood freeze. These weren't recent photos. The clothing, hairstyles, and Polaroid film stock dated them to the mid-1980s. And stamped on the back of each photograph in faded ink, a single letter and number combination. M1, M2, M3. M for what? Murder? Missing? Memphis? The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation launched an immediate task force. Facial recognition technology, age progression software, missing persons databases. They threw everything at identifying these women. 3 weeks into the investigation, they got their first match. Photograph M17 showed a young woman, maybe 19, with distinctive auburn hair and a small scar above her left eyebrow. Facial recognition pinged a missing person report from October 1985. Melissa and Crawford, 19 years old, disappeared from Cookeville, Tennessee, while driving home from Tennessee Tech University. Her case had gone cold 35 years ago. No body ever found. No suspects ever identified. Her family had held a funeral with an empty casket in 1987, desperate for closure that never came. But now they had proof she'd been alive when someone took that photograph. Alive and terrified, and in the hands of a predator who documented his crimes with chilling precision. The task force identified 6 more women from the photographs over the next year, all missing between 1983 and 1988. All from small towns along Interstate 40 in Tennessee. All cases that had gone cold decades ago. But here's the twist that would crack this case wide open and expose a killer who'd been hiding in plain sight for 35 years. The metal box wasn't buried in that field by accident. It was buried on property that had once belonged to a man named Vernon Eugene Hayes, a long-haul trucker who died in a single-vehicle accident on I-40 near Jackson, Tennessee in December 1988. The accident had been ruled just that, an accident. Icy roads, late-night driving, a truck that veered off the highway and crashed into a ravine. Hayes died instantly. Case closed. Except Vernon, Hayes hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered, shot execution style in his truck cab, then staged to look like he'd lost control. And the person who killed him had known exactly what Hayes was. Had known about the photographs, the victims, the decades of predation, had executed justice in the dark, then disappeared into the night. The flood didn't just reveal a serial killer's trophy collection. It revealed that someone else had known all along. Someone who'd taken justice into their own hands in 1988 and kept that secret for 22 years. Sometimes the most disturbing part of solving a murder isn't finding the killer. It's discovering the vigilante. Before we dive deep into this case that spans 3 decades and exposes both a serial killer and the person who stopped him, I need to hear from you. Comment below telling me where you're watching from and your gut reaction. If someone kills a serial killer before police can catch him, are they a murderer or a hero? And if you're new to Untold Cold Case Files, smash that subscribe button right now. We investigate cases that time forgot, cases that deserve answers. And we don't stop until we expose every layer of truth, no matter how dark or complicated it gets. This Tennessee cold case is going to challenge everything you think about justice. Stay with me. Cookeville, Tennessee, in the mid-1980s was the definition of Middle America. Nestled in the Upper Cumberland region, about 80 miles east of Nashville, Cookeville was a college town of 20,000 souls built around Tennessee Technological University. Main Street had the requisite hardware store, family-owned diner, and a movie theater that showed films 3 weeks after they premiered in Nashville. Friday nights meant high school football at Cookeville High, and Sundays meant church attendance that topped 80% of the population. Interstate 40, the major east-west corridor connecting Nashville to Knoxville, cut through the northern edge of town, bringing travelers, commerce, and a connection to the wider world. Truck stops dotted the highway, 24-hour oases where long-haul drivers fueled up, grabbed coffee, and logged their miles before pushing on toward their destinations. The Crawford family was Cookeville through and through. Thomas Crawford worked as a shift supervisor at the Cummins engine plant that employed half the town. His wife, Barbara, taught third grade at Cookeville Elementary. They'd raised 3 children in a modest brick ranch on Jefferson Avenue. 2 sons who'd graduated and moved to Nashville for work, and their youngest, Melissa, Melissa, 19 in the fall of 1985, was a sophomore at Tennessee Tech studying elementary education, following in her mother's footsteps. She lived in the dorms during the week, but came home most weekends to do laundry, raid the refrigerator, and catch up with her parents. Melissa was responsible, her father would later tell investigators, his voice thick with grief. She called when she was running late. She never worried us. That's how we knew something was wrong when she didn't come home. October 23, 1985 was a Wednesday. Melissa had an evening study group for her educational psychology class that ran until 9 p.m. in the library. Her roommate, Jennifer Phillips, remembered Melissa leaving their dorm room at 7:45 p.m., carrying her backpack and a thermos of coffee Barbara had sent from home. The study group ended at 9 p.m., right on schedule. 3 other students confirmed Melissa was there the entire time, participated actively, and seemed in good spirits. She'd mentioned being excited about Halloween the following week. She'd volunteered to help with the campus trick-or-treat event for local kids. At 9:15 p.m., Melissa walked to her car, a 1979 Honda Civic, light blue, parked in the campus lot near the library. 2 students saw her get in. The car started fine. She waved to them and pulled out of the lot. That was the last confirmed sighting of Melissa Crawford. Her drive home should have taken 12 minutes. She'd made it hundreds of times, straight down University Drive, left onto Interstate 40 for 2 exits, then south on Jefferson Pike to her parents' neighborhood. When Melissa hadn't arrived by 10 p.m., Barbara called her dorm room. No answer. She called back at 10:30. Still nothing. At 11 p.m., Thomas Crawford called the Cookeville Police Department. The initial response was frustratingly typical for 1985. She's 19, probably stopped to see friends. Give it until morning. But Thomas Crawford's instincts, honed by 2 decades of shift work watching machinery for the slightest malfunction, told him something was desperately wrong. At 6:30 a.m. on October 24th, a Tennessee Highway Patrol trooper spotted Melissa's blue Honda Civic. It was parked on the shoulder of Interstate 40 westbound, about halfway between the Tennessee Tech exit and the Jefferson Pike exit, essentially right in the middle of her route home. The car was locked. Keys gone. Melissa's backpack sat in the passenger seat, textbooks still inside. Her thermos rolled around on the floorboard. No signs of struggle inside the vehicle. But the driver's side door wouldn't open from the inside. The interior door handle was missing, not broken, but removed, leaving just a metal stub. Someone had deliberately disabled it, so the door could only be opened from outside. Melissa Crawford had been trapped in her own car. The investigation that followed revealed a calculated abduction. Someone had followed Melissa from campus, waited for an opportunity when she was alone on the highway, and used their vehicle to force her to pull over, possibly by bumping her from behind or pulling alongside and gesturing that something was wrong with her car. When she'd stopped, the predator had approached, perhaps offering help. At some point, maybe through the window, maybe when she'd opened the door, they'd gained control. The disabled door handle suggested premeditation. This wasn't an opportunistic crime. This was planned. Cookeville Police and Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents worked the case intensively. They interviewed hundreds of people, students, faculty, truck drivers who'd been on I-40 that night, employees at nearby truck stops. They examined Melissa's life with excruciating detail, looking for stalkers, jealous ex-boyfriends, anyone with motive. Nothing. Melissa had no enemies, no concerning relationships, no one who'd shown unhealthy interest in her. Tips came in, as they always do, but none led anywhere. A truck driver thought he'd seen a blue Honda pulled over around 9:30 p.m., but hadn't stopped to help. A waitress at the Pilot truck stop reported serving a nervous-looking young woman around 10 p.m., but when shown photos, she couldn't confirm it was Melissa. Weeks became months. The Crawfords appeared on local news, begging for information. They hired a private investigator who found nothing police hadn't already discovered. Tennessee Tech held a candlelight vigil attended by 500 students. But Melissa Crawford was gone, vanished into the night somewhere on that stretch of Interstate 40. Her case went cold by spring 1986. What the Crawfords couldn't have known, what no one knew, was that Melissa wasn't the first, and she wouldn't be the last. Interstate 40 stretches 455 miles across Tennessee, connecting Memphis on the Mississippi River to the North Carolina border in the Smoky Mountains. In the 1980s, before cell phones and GPS, before rest stops had security cameras and highway call boxes, I-40 was a ribbon of asphalt through isolated countryside where help could be miles away. For long-haul truckers, I-40 was a lifeline, the major east-west route for commercial traffic. For young women driving alone, especially at night, it could be treacherous. Between 1983 and 1988, at least 12 young women disappeared from communities along Tennessee's I-40 corridor. Different towns, different circumstances, but enough similarities to suggest a pattern, though law enforcement agencies didn't connect the dots at the time. Angela Marie Foster, 21, disappeared from Lebanon, Tennessee, March 1983. Last seen at a gas station on I-40. Tammy Lynn Harrison, 19, disappeared from Crossville, Tennessee, November 1983. Car found abandoned on I-40 shoulder. Melissa and Crawford, 19, disappeared from Cookeville, Tennessee, October 1985. Car found on I-40 with disabled door handle. Rebecca Sue Dalton, 22, disappeared from Cookeville, Tennessee, April 1986. Last seen leaving work at a truck stop on I-40. Jennifer Lynn Maxwell, 20, disappeared from Jackson, Tennessee, September 1987. Vehicle found at I-40 rest area. And 5 more cases with similar profiles. Young women, I-40 corridor, vanished without witnesses, never found. But in the 1980s, Tennessee had no centralized database for missing persons. Local police departments handled their own cases. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation got involved in high-profile cases, but didn't have resources to cross-reference patterns across the state. Each disappearance was investigated as an isolated incident. Some departments suspected foul play. Others theorized runaways. A few cases got media attention. Most faded quickly. The families, though, they never stopped searching. Thomas and Barbara Crawford spent every weekend for 2 years driving I-40, stopping at truck stops and rest areas, showing Melissa's photo to anyone who'd look. They posted flyers. They called the TBI monthly. They refused to give up. "Someone knows something," Thomas would say, a mantra he repeated to anyone who'd listen. "Someone saw her that night. Someone knows where she is." But the answers wouldn't come from traditional investigation. They'd come from a flood, a metal box, and photographs that proved Melissa's worst fears had come true. The May 2010 Nashville flood was a 1,000-year event, a meteorological nightmare that dropped nearly 20 inches of rain in 2 days. The Cumberland River crested at 51.86 feet, 12 feet above flood stage. 11 counties declared disaster areas. 26 people died. Damages exceeded $2 billion. When waters finally receded, the cleanup revealed the detritus of destroyed lives. Furniture, appliances, photo albums, family heirlooms, all scattered across muddy fields and tangled in fence lines. FEMA recovery worker Daniel Martinez was documenting flood damage in a rural area off Old Hickory Boulevard, about 15 miles northeast of Nashville, when he spotted the metal box. It was an ammo can, the waterproof kind veterans use for storage, wedged tight against a barbed wire fence. Martinez's training kicked in. Flood debris could contain hazardous materials. He photographed the box's location, noted the coordinates, and carefully extracted it. The seal was intact, remarkably, given the violence of the flood. Inside, sealed in multiple layers of plastic bags. 37 Polaroid photographs. Martinez took one look and called 911. Metro Nashville police responded within minutes. When Detective Sarah Chen opened those bags and saw what they contained, she immediately contacted the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The photographs were nightmarish. Young women in various states of distress, bound, gagged, clearly terrified. Different girls, different settings, but certain elements remained consistent. Gloved hands visible in many frames, stark lighting suggesting basement or garage locations, and that alphanumeric coding on the back. M1 through M37. TBI formed an emergency task force. Lead investigator was Special Agent Marcus Williams, a 20-year veteran who specialized in cold cases and serial predators. "I've seen a lot in 2 decades," Williams told reporters later. "But those photographs, knowing these women had been trapped, terrorized, and we'd never known, it changes you." The task force's first priority: identify the victims. Modern facial recognition technology was light years beyond what existed in the 1980s. They uploaded the photographs to the FBI's National Crime Information Center database, cross-referencing against missing persons reports from Tennessee and surrounding states going back 40 years. The hits came quickly. Photograph M17, Melissa and Crawford, missing from Cookeville since October 1985. Photograph M8, Tammy Lynn Harrison, missing from Crossville since November 1983. Photograph M22, Rebecca Sue Dalton, missing from Cookeville since April 1986. Over the following months, they identified 6 more women from the photographs, all missing from Tennessee I-40 corridor communities between 1983 and 1988. But that left 28 unidentified victims. Women whose faces stared out from Polaroids with desperate eyes. Women no one had reported missing, or whose cases were filed in databases that didn't talk to each other, or whose families had given up hope years ago. The task force worked systematically. They enhanced the photographs, looking for identifying details. Jewelry, tattoos, clothing brands, anything that might generate leads. They consulted with forensic anthropologists who aged the faces, creating projections of what these women might look like today if they'd survived. They also analyzed the backgrounds visible in the photos. Most showed nondescript concrete walls, basement or garage settings. But a few contained details, a particular type of cinder block common to 1970s construction, a glimpse of a door with distinctive hardware, shadows suggesting window placement. Forensic analysts studied the Polaroids themselves. The film stock 600 series was manufactured by Polaroid between 1981 and 1991. Chemical analysis of the prints suggested they'd been taken between 1983 and 1988, consistent with the identified victims' disappearance dates. But the breakthrough came from the box itself. The ammunition can was a military-issue M2A1 model, manufactured in the mid-1970s. It bore no serial number, but showed signs of heavy use, scratches, dents, paint wear. Inside the lid, barely visible, someone had etched initials with a sharp tool. VEH. TBI agents scoured military records, cross-referencing against the property where the box was found. The land, now underwater retention area, had once been a small farm. County records showed it had been sold in 1989 to developers who'd let it sit idle for years. The previous owner, from 1975 to 1989, Vernon Eugene Hayes. Special Agent Williams felt the pieces clicking. He pulled everything available on Vernon Hayes. White male, born 1941 in Dixon, Tennessee. Army veteran, served 1960 to 1964, honorable discharge. Worked as a long-haul trucker from 1965 until his death. Drove for several companies over the years, primarily hauling freight along I-40 corridor routes. Died December 18, 1988, in a single-vehicle accident on I-40 near Jackson, Tennessee. Williams requested the accident report from the Tennessee Highway Patrol Archives. What he read made his investigative instinct scream. The accident report was sparse. Hayes' semi-truck, a 1985 Peterbilt hauling empty trailer, had left the highway at approximately 2:30 a.m., crashed through a guardrail, and rolled down a steep embankment. Hayes died on impact. The investigating trooper noted icy road conditions and concluded Hayes had simply lost control. But there were details that troubled Williams. The crash site was on a straight stretch of highway, not a curve where loss of control would be expected. Hayes' logbook showed he'd stopped at a truck stop 20 miles earlier and had only been driving for 30 minutes, unlikely to be fatigued. And the trooper's notes mentioned minor blood spatter inconsistent with accident trauma, but didn't pursue it. Williams requested the medical examiner's report from 1988. It took weeks to locate in archives, but when it arrived, Williams knew they'd found their killer. Vernon Eugene Hayes hadn't died in an accident. He'd been shot in the head before the truck crashed. What would you have done if you'd been investigating this case in 1988? Comment your theory below. Were there signs that were missed? The most detailed answers may be featured in our next episode. The medical examiner in 1988, Dr. Robert Trentwood, had noted the gunshot wound in his autopsy report. Small caliber entry wound behind the right ear, no exit wound. But his report also noted extensive trauma from accident, making definitive cause of death determination difficult. In the context of a highway accident on an icy night, with a truck burned in the crash, the gunshot wound had been noted but not prioritized. The ME had ruled the death accidental, blunt force trauma from the crash, with a gunshot wound listed as a potential pre-mortem injury requiring further investigation. That further investigation never happened. The Madison County Sheriff's Department had reviewed the ME's findings, but concluded the evidence was inconclusive. Maybe Hayes had been suicidal and shot himself, then crashed. Maybe he'd been cleaning a gun in the cab and had discharged accidentally. Without witnesses or clear evidence of foul play, they'd classified it as an accidental death and closed the case. But Special Agent Williams, looking at it through the lens of 2010 and those 37 photographs, saw something else entirely. Vernon Hayes had been murdered, executed, and whoever killed him had known what he was. The timeline was damning. The last photograph in the collection, M37, was dated October 1988 based on forensic analysis. Hayes died December 1988, just 2 months later. Someone had discovered Hayes' crimes. Someone had taken justice into their own hands. And then that someone had buried the evidence on Hayes' property, insurance, perhaps, or a conscience that couldn't destroy proof of the victim's existence. Williams' team expanded their investigation in 2 directions: identify more victims and find Hayes' killer. The break in identifying Vernon Hayes' victims came from an unexpected source: family DNA databases. In 2011, the TBI began working with genealogy companies like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, using DNA extracted from the adhesive on the backs of the Polaroids, where Hayes had likely licked the labels before affixing them. The technique was cutting-edge, controversial, and painstakingly slow. But over the next 3 years, they identified 11 more victims. Young women from Tennessee, Kentucky, and Arkansas. Most were hitchhikers or college students whose cars had broken down on I-40. Several had last been seen at truck stops, where Hayes was documented to have stopped on his routes. By 2014, 23 of the 37 photographs had names attached. 23 families who'd lived decades without answers suddenly had confirmation of their worst fears. The task force cross-referenced Hayes' logbooks, retrieved from the trucking company archives, with the disappearances. The correlation was damning. Hayes had been on the road, documented on or near I-40, within 48 hours of every single identified victim's disappearance. But finding victims was only half the mystery. Finding Hayes' killer required a different approach. Special Agent Williams assembled a profile of the unknown vigilante. Working with FBI behavioral analysts, they constructed a theory. The killer likely had personal connection to one of Hayes' victims. They discovered evidence of Hayes' crimes, possibly the photograph collection itself. Rather than go to police, they'd taken justice into their own hands, executing Hayes and staging it as an accident. The burial of the photographs suggested someone with conscience. They couldn't destroy evidence of the victims, but also couldn't turn it over without implicating themselves in Hayes' murder. Williams' team compiled a list of potential suspects. Family members of identified victims who had the means, motive, and opportunity to kill Hayes in December 1988. They looked at Thomas Crawford, Melissa's father. He'd been vocal, persistent, driven in his search for answers. But in December 1988, Thomas had been at work at the Cummins plant. Time cards proved it. His supervisor confirmed Crawford had worked a double shift the night Hayes died. They looked at Marcus Harrison, Tammy Harrison's older brother. Marcus had military training, firearms experience. But in 1988, he'd been stationed in Germany with the Army. His alibi was ironclad. One by one, they eliminated suspects. The breakthrough came from a different angle entirely. In 2015, a retired Tennessee Highway Patrol trooper named James Hutchison read about the Hayes case in a Nashville newspaper. Something nagged at him. He dug through his personal files, decades of notes he'd kept from cases that bothered him. He found an incident report from December 16, 1988, 2 days before Hayes died. Hutchison had responded to a call at the pilot truck stop near Jackson, Tennessee. A disturbance between two truckers. When he arrived, he found one trucker, identified in his report as V. Hayes, arguing with another driver, a younger man Hutchison didn't recognize. The younger man had accused Hayes of looking at his girlfriend wrong. Hayes had denied it. Both had been drinking coffee, not alcohol, so Hutchison had told them to move along. He'd noted in his report, younger male, approximate 30 to 35, drove blue Ford F-150, Tennessee plates, partial plate, JM. Hutchison couldn't remember the full plate number, but he'd noted the partial. Williams' team ran every blue Ford F-150 registered in Tennessee in 1988 with plates starting JM. They found 37 vehicles. And one owner jumped off the page, Jason Michael Dalton, Rebecca Sue Dalton's older brother. Rebecca, photograph M22, had disappeared from a truck stop in Cookeville in April 1986. She'd been working the night shift, waitressing to pay her way through nursing school. She'd vanished during her break, sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight. Her car was found in the employee lot. She was never seen again. Jason Dalton, 28 in 1988, had been a long-haul trucker himself. His routes took him along I-40. He would have known truck stops, known how truckers operated, known Vernon Hayes by sight, if not by name. The trucking community was small. Williams pulled everything on Jason Dalton and found a ghost. Jason had sold his truck in January 1989, 1 month after Hayes died. He'd quit long-haul trucking entirely, taken a local delivery job in Knoxville. In 1992, he'd moved to Oregon. In 2003, he died in a workplace accident, a forklift mishap at a warehouse in Portland. Dead end. Literally. But Williams wasn't satisfied. He flew to Portland, interviewed Jason's widow, Emily Dalton. Did Jason ever talk about his sister's disappearance? Williams asked. Emily's eyes filled with tears. It destroyed him. He blamed himself for not protecting her. He had nightmares about it for years. Mrs. Dalton, did Jason ever mention a trucker named Vernon Hayes? Emily's face went pale. How do you know that name? The story came pouring out. In December 1988, Jason had been at a truck stop in Jackson, Tennessee. He'd noticed a trucker, Hayes, watching a young waitress with unsettling intensity. The same way Jason imagined someone had watched Rebecca before she vanished. Jason had confronted Hayes. They'd argued. A highway patrol officer had broken it up, but Jason hadn't let it go. He'd followed Hayes when he left the truck stop, followed him for miles, watching, waiting, his grief and rage building. When Hayes had pulled over at a rest area to sleep in his cab, Jason had approached. He'd had a gun, a .22 caliber pistol he kept in his truck for protection. He'd knocked on Hayes' window. Hayes had rolled it down, suspicious but not alarmed. Jason had demanded to know if Hayes had taken Rebecca. Had he killed her? Hayes had laughed. Actually laughed. That laugh had sealed his fate. Jason shot him. 1 round, behind the ear. Hayes died instantly. Jason had staged the scene, started the truck, aimed it toward the embankment, jumped out as it rolled. The crash the fire, it all looked like an accident. But afterward, the guilt consumed him. He'd killed a man based on suspicion and a sinister laugh. What if he was wrong? He'd returned to Hayes' property. Public records made it easy to find. He'd broken into Hayes' trailer home searching for what? Proof? Absolution? He'd found the photographs in a locked toolbox, hidden in a crawl space under the trailer. 37 Polaroids. 37 women. And one of them, M22, was Rebecca. Jason had taken a box. He'd buried it on Hayes' property, deep and careful. Evidence that Hayes deserved what he'd gotten, but also evidence of Jason's own crime. He'd never told anyone. The guilt, both for killing Hayes and for the relief that Hayes deserved it, had haunted him until his death in 2003. Emily Dalton provided Williams with Jason's personal journals, kept in a storage unit she'd never opened. The confession was there, handwritten across dozens of pages. Williams faced an ethical quandary. Jason Dalton was dead. Vernon Hayes was dead. Prosecuting a dead vigilante who'd killed a dead serial killer served no purpose. But the families deserved truth. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation held a press conference on November 15, 2015, 5 years after the photographs were discovered. Special Agent Marcus Williams stood at a podium flanked by victim photographs, facing cameras from news outlets across the country. He took a deep breath and told the truth. Vernon Eugene Hayes had murdered at least 12 young women between 1983 and 1988 along the I-40 corridor. 11 more victims in the photographs remained unidentified, but investigators believed all 37 women depicted were deceased. Hayes himself had been murdered in December 1988 by Jason Michael Dalton, a vigilante who discovered Hayes' crimes and taken justice into his own hands. Dalton had died in 2003. No charges would be filed. The reaction was immediate and divided. Victim families expressed conflicting emotions. Some, like Thomas Crawford, felt vindicated. Jason Dalton stopped a monster. I wish I could shake his hand. I wish I could thank him for making Hayes pay for what he did to Melissa. Others struggled with the complexity. Tammy Harrison's mother, Patricia, told reporters, "I'm grateful Hayes is dead, but I wish Jason had gone to the police with those photographs in 1988. Maybe investigators could have found where Vernon buried our daughters. Maybe we could have brought them home." That was the tragedy within the tragedy. Despite extensive searches of properties Hayes had owned or had access to, his trailer home, his parents' farm in Dixon County, remote areas along his trucking routes, no bodies were ever recovered. Melissa Crawford, Rebecca Dalton, Tammy Harrison, and 9 other identified victims remain missing to this day. Their families held memorial services, finally able to grieve with certainty, but without the closure of proper burial. The legal questions surrounding Jason Dalton's vigilante justice sparked national debate. Jason Dalton committed murder, argued Vanderbilt law professor Rebecca Thornton in a widely read op-ed. The fact that his victim was himself a murderer doesn't change that. We're a nation of laws, not vengeance. If we excuse Dalton's actions, we excuse lawlessness. Others disagreed. Hayes would never have been caught, wrote former FBI profiler John Douglas. Jason Dalton did what the justice system failed to do. He stopped a serial killer who'd operated for years without detection. That's not murder. That's heroism. Tennessee prosecutors reviewed the case thoroughly, ultimately deciding not to pursue posthumous charges against Dalton or any investigation into potential accomplices. Jason Dalton is deceased. Vernon Hayes is deceased. No prosecution serves justice at this point, announced District Attorney Michael Foster. But they did pursue one avenue: civil litigation. In 2016, families of identified victims filed a class action lawsuit against Hayes' estate and the trucking companies that had employed him. The lawsuit alleged the companies had failed to conduct proper background checks, ignored warning signs, and created conditions that enabled Hayes' crimes. The discovery process revealed disturbing patterns. Multiple complaints had been filed over the years about Hayes' behavior. Truck stop waitresses who'd reported feeling uncomfortable. A 1982 incident where a female hitchhiker claimed Hayes had acted inappropriately. a 1986 complaint from a truck stop manager about Hayes lurking near the women's restroom. None of these complaints had been investigated seriously. None had resulted in disciplinary action. The lawsuit settled in 2018 for $4.7 million, distributed among victim families. The trucking companies admitted no wrongdoing, but agreed to implement comprehensive screening and monitoring protocols for drivers. For the families, the money meant little, but the acknowledgement, the official recognition that their daughters had been failed by systems meant to protect them, provided a measure of validation. The Tennessee legislature passed Rebecca's Law in 2017, mandating background checks for all commercial drivers and establishing a hotline for reporting suspicious behavior at truck stops and rest areas. Senator Michelle Doyle, who sponsored the bill, said, "We can't bring these women back, but we can honor their memory by making sure this never happens again." The broader implications rippled through law enforcement nationwide. The I-40 case demonstrated how serial predators could operate across jurisdictions, hiding in plain sight within industries built on mobility and anonymity. The FBI established the Highway Serial Killings Initiative in 2009, before the Hayes case broke, but the I-40 revelations gave it new urgency. By 2024, the initiative had connected more than 850 homicides to long-haul truckers, resulting in dozens of arrests. As for the 14 victims who remain unidentified in the photographs, the TBI maintains an active investigation. The photos are available on the agency's website, viewable by the public. Someone somewhere recognizes these women, says Special Agent Williams, now retired but still consulting on the case. "We won't stop until we name every single victim." In 2019, one more victim was identified through genetic genealogy. Photograph M31, a young woman now known to be Christina Marie Sullivan, who disappeared from a rest area near Knoxville in 1987. Her sister, who'd been 8 years old when Christina vanished, finally got to lay her to rest. 32 years, she said at Christina's memorial service. 32 years, we wondered. Now we know. And Vernon Hayes can't hurt anyone ever again, thanks to Jason Dalton. The moral complexity of that statement, thanking a murderer for killing a murderer, encapsulates the impossible ethics at the heart of this case. The Cumberland River flood of 2010 didn't just reveal Vernon Hayes' crimes. It forced Tennessee to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, vigilantism, and the systems that fail to protect the vulnerable. Thomas and Barbara Crawford, now in their 80s, established the Melissa Crawford Memorial Scholarship at Tennessee Tech in 2016. The scholarship supports criminal justice students who demonstrate commitment to victim advocacy. To date, 37 students have received the scholarship, one for each photograph in Vernon Hayes' collection. Melissa wanted to be a teacher, Barbara said at the scholarship's dedication. She wanted to help children. This is how we honor that. These students will go into law enforcement, into prosecution, into advocacy. They'll protect people Melissa never got to protect. Thomas Crawford died in 2019 at age 87. His obituary requested donations to the scholarship fund rather than flowers. At his funeral, his pastor read a letter Thomas had written years earlier. "I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what Jason Dalton did. Part of me sees a murderer. Part of me sees the man who stopped the monster that killed my daughter. Maybe both are true. Maybe justice is messier than we want to believe. But I know this. Because of Jason, Vernon Hayes never killed again. That matters." The property where the photographs were found, Vernon Hayes' former land, was purchased by the state of Tennessee in 2017 and converted into a memorial park. The Floodwaters Memorial, as it's known, honors all victims of the 2010 flood, as well as the women whose images were recovered from the mud. A granite wall bears the names of the 23 identified victims, with space left for the 14 still unknown. Fresh flowers appear there regularly, left by families, advocates, and strangers moved by the tragedy. Emily Dalton, Jason's widow, has lived quietly in Oregon since his death. She's declined most interview requests, but released a statement in 2016. Jason was a good man who did a terrible thing for what he believed were the right reasons. He lived with the weight of that choice every day until he died. I don't ask anyone to forgive him or condemn him. I just ask that you remember. He was human, he was hurting, and he was trying to protect people the only way he knew how in that moment. Right or wrong, that was his truth. Special Agent Marcus Williams retired from the TBI in 2018, but continues to consult on the Hayes case. He travels the country lecturing at law enforcement conferences about serial predators, systemic failures, and the importance of interjurisdictional communication. The Hayes case haunts me, he said in a 2022 podcast interview. Not because of what Vernon Hayes did. Monsters exist, we know that. But because of how many times the system almost caught him and didn't. The complaints ignored. The warning signs dismissed. The agencies that didn't talk to each other. Jason Dalton killed Vernon Hayes in 1988. But how many women died between 1983 and 1988 because we weren't paying attention? The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation now maintains a cold case database accessible to every law enforcement agency in the state. It cross-references missing persons, unsolved homicides, and suspicious incidents, specifically looking for patterns that span jurisdictions. Since its implementation in 2016, the database has helped solve 14 cold cases, including 2 that showed patterns similar to Hayes' methodology. In 2023, researchers at the University of Tennessee published a comprehensive study on the I-40 killer case, analyzing systemic failures and proposing reforms. Their recommendations have been adopted by law enforcement agencies in 12 states. As for the 14 unidentified women in the photographs, advocacy groups have taken up their cause. The organization Nameless No More works specifically on identifying Jane does through genealogy, forensic reconstruction, and public awareness campaigns. Every person in those photographs was someone's daughter, says founder Michelle Hartman. Someone loved them. Someone is still wondering what happened to them. We owe it to them and to their families to never stop trying. The Cumberland River still flows through Nashville, past the Memorial Park, past the spot where a flood once revealed a metal box that held 37 secrets. The river that destroyed so much in 2010 also, paradoxically, delivered a form of justice 35 years delayed. And somewhere in Oregon, buried alongside Jason Michael Dalton, rests a man who committed murder and stopped a murderer, a vigilante whose actions saved lives at the cost of his own soul. The ethics remain debatable. The pain remains real. The victims remain gone. But their stories are finally told. Their names, most of them, are finally known. And Vernon Eugene Hayes' legacy isn't his crimes, but the people who refused to let those crimes be forgotten. Sometimes justice arrives through official channels. Sometimes it comes from a flood. And sometimes, controversially, impossibly devastatingly, it comes from the barrel of a .22 caliber pistol fired by a grieving brother on a dark highway in 1988. If this story challenged your understanding of justice, if it made you think about the systems that fail to protect the vulnerable, then subscribe to Untold Cold Case Files. Share this video to honor the victims, the women whose names we know, and the 14 we're still fighting to identify. Every view keeps their memory alive. Every share might reach someone who recognizes a face in those photographs. Drop a comment and tell me, was Jason Dalton a murderer or a hero? Can both be true? And if you have information about any of the 14 unidentified women, please contact the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Your information could give a family the closure they've waited decades to receive. Justice isn't always clean, but it's always worth pursuing.